Hey everybody, this is our week 2 discussion forum review. I continue to enjoy reading your entries in the discussion forum. As a teacher, we get really excited when we observe our students learning, and that's what I'm seeing when I read your posts to the forum. So that's great. Keep up the good work. But here's some more recommendations on what we can do and some observations about some of the things that you guys are talking about. First, if you have not watched the week 1 discussion forum review, stop watching this and go back and watch the first one and then come back and watch this one. It was fairly obvious that some of you, in fact, did not watch the week 1 discussion forum review. I make a number of recommendations, some of which I'm going to repeat here in briefer form, but I expand on them in number 1. Okay, so make sure you do that. Okay. First thing, still some issues with punctuation, grammar, capitalization. Let's try to do better about that. Particularly, I continue to see a lot of problems with capitalization. People not capitalizing Puritans, people not capitalizing Christian, people not capitalizing first words in sentences. Okay, there wasn't much of that, but there was some of that. Okay, again, I repeat, you're not sending a text message to your friend. This is a university assignment. Let's approach it like that. So starting week 3, if I see repeated problems with grammar and punctuation and capitalization, I'm going to start taking a point or two away. Okay. I'm not talking about, for example, you use the word Puritan 5 times in your post and you forget to capitalize it once. Now, I'm not talking about a little slip or a little error like that. I'm talking about the repeated flagrant violation of good grammar. You know what I'm saying? You give me 4 sentences and you don't capitalize the first word in any one of those. That's not okay. At least it's not okay in a university context. Right? It's fine you're shooting a text message to your friend. Not okay here. So let's do better than that. A lot of you watched the first review, and one of the things I talked about in the first review was I want to see more descriptive titles, not just week 1, week 2, not Puritans, not your name. Some of you posted to the week 2 forum before I even posted my video. And some of you emailed me apologetic and said you were sorry and, you know, where's the edit button? And I responded, I got back to you in email and said, no, it's okay. Like, I can't expect you to follow instructions before I even post them. That's okay. And everybody still for this week that made an entry for week 2 discussion forum got full credit for it. However, a lot of you obviously didn't watch the video or watched it very late in the week, and I told you in a class announcement, watch it right away before you post. So some of you also aren't paying attention to the class announcements, which you should. The announcements are there to help you, and there's a possibility you start ignoring those, you're going to maybe start losing some points here because you're just not following instructions. Those of you that put descriptive titles on your entries, it was so much better. As I was going through and reading them and I saw a title describing what you were going to talk about, it was so much better. I look forward to clicking that link because I wanted to know what you were talking about in your title. So I want everybody to really start focusing on this. Don't give me a title that just says Puritans or week 3 discussion or your name. Okay, that will be another reason you might lose a point if you're not doing a better job. Just give me a hint in your title about what you are going to talk about. It doesn't have to be super creative. It doesn't have to be super original. Just tell myself and your fellow classmates in the title what you're going to be talking about. It could be just one word that describes what you're going to talk about. But do that. It was so much better this week for those of you that added a title or a more creative title. Okay. Length. I talked about this again before. Some of you that are giving me one sentence, particularly short, one sentence entry posts, I told you in the week one, you're sort of flirting with getting less credit. I'm not saying you can never give a one sentence post, but longer one sentences with multiple clauses are better than just a simple sentence saying something along the lines, "Hi, Michelle, I really agree with what you said, period, end of entry post." That's going to start losing points. Okay, what do you agree with? Why do you agree with it? Elaborate, go into more detail. Give another student a reason to want to comment on what you're saying, because there's some meat there in terms of your observations, your learning, your challenging of premises. Okay, by the way, I would say 97% of you did just fine with this. So I don't mean to freak everybody out, but if you know you entered one sentence and it was a fairly quick, by the way, this was more of the case, those of you that were making entries a couple hours before the deadline, you're putting it off to the last minute. Some of you didn't put a lot of thought, didn't have a lot to say. You gave me a cheap, dirty little one sentence, and going forward, that might not be enough. So try to make your entry posts a little more meaty. Like I said, like 97% of you did just fine, and I'm super happy about that. One of the things I talked about in week one discussion is I would like a little bit more polite challenging or polite correcting when your fellow student gets something wrong in their entry. And in week one, I told you you're actually doing that student, you're gently correcting a favor, because if you know for sure they're getting something wrong, you want to help them out and indicate that they might be wrong and give them some direction in terms of how they might rethink this issue to be more in line with what we've been learning in this class. You're not being a jerk. You're not being a troll. That's not what I'm talking about. You're not nitpicking little minor things. But if somebody's getting some stuff wrong, try and correct that. There was a little bit of that this week. But I would like to see more of it. Okay, I would like to see more of it. Once again, there were some students getting stuff wrong. Okay. By the way, I'm teaching 5 sections of American Studies 201. And so these observations I'm making pertain to all of my classes. Okay, so if you weren't in your particular class noticing much of this, that might be because your class was a bit better with this. Okay. But overall, in all of my classes, I saw some of you guys getting some stuff wrong, and you should be really appreciative if one of your fellow students points this out. Don't be offended in the forum. You're not losing points in the forum. You want your fellow students to correct you, get you on the right track. So when it matters on unit assessments and essays coming up, you're getting stuff right. So try and do that. Once again, I was thrilled with how cordial everybody was. That was great. It makes the online environment so much better when people are kind and decent and respectful. And so, once again, you guys did that. But try and help your fellow students out. Try and correct them when they run into some issues. Okay. What about some of the things you guys noticed this week, some observations you made? Lot of, so the question was, what has surprised you or interested you so far about what you're learning about the Puritans? A lot of focus on predestination, which does not surprise me at all. Predestination is super interesting. It's very different from the way a lot of contemporary um, people think about the nature of life, and in particularly religious belief and religious faith. Um, a lot of you are struck by the way that the Puritans organized land, their communal nature, the power of the select board. I agree with all of you in this. These are all interesting things. These are all reasons why I like talking about and teaching and learning about the Puritans. So I found a lot of the things that struck you are also things that continue to strike me about the Puritans. Okay, one last thing worth talking about. I told you in week 1, I want our forum to get better as we go on, to improve weekly. One of the things I want to talk about today is the idea of presentism. Okay, presentism is a problem in studying history. It's something that we try to avoid in understanding the past. What is presentism? Presentism is using contemporary values, beliefs, and insights to judge and try and understand the past. We avoid it because it obscures our understanding of the past. We want to understand the past within its own context. To be fair to people in the past in understanding the world and not unfairly judging them by standards established hundreds of years later, sometimes thousands of years later. It's just not fair to them. And it obscures understanding their world for what it was. So, the word crazy was used a lot in week 2. And that's potentially okay. If you are saying, wow, I'm learning a lot about the Puritans, and to my presentist, or to my modern sensibilities, Puritan life seems crazy. But then you go on to say something along the lines, but I understand this was their context and this is how they viewed things. That's fine. Look, one of the reasons I studied history as I became more and more interested in it in high school and in college was that I was often struck by how crazy the past was. It was fascinating to me. But it's different if you just straight up say, oh, the Puritans were crazy based on what I think from my life today. That's not fair. The Puritans didn't grow up in the 21st century. The Puritans didn't grow up with your sensibilities. So therefore, to hang it on them that somehow they should have known better about things you know in the 21st century when they were living in the 17th and 18th century, it's not fair. The analogy I can make is, imagine being on the ocean and you're above water, and our eyes are made for above the water. And then you dive down into the water without a mask, and our eyes don't work very well there. And below the surface of the sea, it's dark and it's murky and you can't really make stuff out. That's what's like when you use presentism to project your values on the past. You're trying to understand something your eyes aren't equipped for. But when you try to understand the past in its own context, judging the 17th century based on 17th century standards and beliefs and values, then suddenly it's like putting a mask on and diving under the water, and now everything's clear and you can see everything. And there's beauty down there. and there's terror down there, and there's wonderful creatures, and there's terrifying creatures, but now you understand because you're not trying to observe the underwater world with eyes that weren't made for observing the underwater world. So I want to try and get you guys to try and understand the past within its own context. Try to be less judgmental based on our contemporary standards. Try to imagine being in the 17th century, growing up in their world, and trying to see things from their perspective. All right? I'd like to see more of that. By the way, I'm not saying this is an easy thing, and I'm not saying you guys should automatically know how to do it. I'm introducing this concept to you. So I'm not mad anybody was doing this on the forum. Everybody got full credit this week. But as we try to get things better, I want you to more start thinking like real historians. And one of the things that historians do is we try to avoid presentism. Okay? So watch your punctuation, your grammar, your capitalization. Make sure you're not giving me a little slapdash, one sentence, no thought entry starting week through 3. Work on those titles, make them a bit more descriptive, let the reader know what they're going to be working on. Try and avoid some of this presentism. For the grammar, the length in the title, I might start taking a point or two off starting next week. You've been warned in 2 of these discussion forums not to do that. And so if you just persist in doing that, that just tells me you're not paying attention to these things, and you should be paying attention to these things. I won't knock you for the presentism thing. That's a much trickier, more complex thing. That's something I just want to get into your head to try and get you to try and avoid that. Okay. All right, everybody. That's it for our little review. Take care. Talk to you next time. Bye.